Homefront the Revolution probably isn't a game you'd expect to call quality. Launching exactly 1 week after Uncharted 4, it was heavily panned by critics for releasing in an incredibly buggy state.
What makes combat extra frustrating is a surprising number of bugs. Enemies will frequently spawn on top of you as you're walking around the world, or may disappear entirely as you move around them. One of my personal favorites is the checkpoint save system, which on multiple occasions respawned me with my weapon holstered in the center of a large group of enemies. And this one was extra fun because with no option to restart the mission or generate a custom save, my only options were to fight my way through or start the whole game over again.
Every single time the game autosaved, which happens constantly during the campaign, the screen would freeze for a solid 2 seconds. During several of the more chaotic moments, the frame rate struggled to keep up, occasionally slowing all the way to a sputter. More than once, all the audio besides the character's dialogue cut out entirely. And along the way, I noticed dozens of smaller issues, like my character's hand clipping through a door every time a particular animation played.
But with about a year's worth of updates, a trio of DLCs that fix several complaints about the game's writing, albeit a trio that takes around 3 to 4 hours to complete all 3 campaigns, and basic price drops putting the game at around $40 to get it and the aforementioned DLC, the title was chiseled down into a surprisingly fun open world FPS that I'd easily consider a massive improvement over the first game. But the most fascinating part of Homefront the Revolution was there since day one. In the restricted zone area, one of the buildings contains a heavily damaged arcade machine, and interacting with said arcade machine boots up a seemingly unrelated game. Timesplitters 2, a much-loved first-person shooter released back in 2002, is inexplicably stored on the arcade machine, and even more curiously, it's not the full game. The first 2 missions are there, but not much else. No map maker, no multiplayer, just those 2 missions playable in single player only. But what's really interesting is that was clearly meant to be a full port at some point. But before we get into that, we need to understand the history behind the dev team that created Timesplitters. In 1998, shortly after Rare released Goldeneye 007 on the Nintendo 64, 4 major team members behind it left to start their own company. Directors David Doak and Stephen Ellis, lead artist Carl Hilton, alongside composer Graham Norgate, formed what would become known as Free Radical Design. Not even 2 years later, they managed to drop their first game, and as a PS2 launch title to boot. That game was Timesplitters. Taking on Rare's own Perfect Dark, released about 5 months prior, they both were after the same goal, creating a Bond-free successor to Goldeneye. But the execution between them couldn't be any more different. While Perfect Dark was a relatively serious adventure taking place in a cyberpunk universe inspired by shows like Ghost in the Shell and Aeon Flux, Timesplitters instead used its sci-fi setting for comedy, placing the player in a cartoonish world where a protagonist jumped through various time periods, ranging from ancient Egyptian tombs to futuristic spaceports. In the short term, Perfect Dark won out, easily beating out Timesplitters' still good 82 Metascore with a 97. But unlike Perfect Dark, it didn't take over 5 years for the next Timesplitters game to come out. Timesplitters 2, released in 2002, took pretty much everything the first game did and improved it. The single player campaign was longer, the multiplayer modes had even more content, and most importantly, it was no longer exclusive to the PlayStation 2, heavily receiving GameCube and Xbox ports about a week after the PS2 version. After this, Free Radical continued to cruise forward, briefly switching into more serious fare with a third-person stealth game Second Sight in 2004, before bringing back Timesplitters once more in 2005. Then Haze happened. Initially starting off as a serious first-person game for 7th gen systems, it quickly got derailed over the sheer amount of effort they did to craft an entirely new engine. To make matters worse, they had to share the rights to the game with their new publisher Ubisoft, who heavily meddled with the development process, expanding it into what they were hoping would become a major PS3 exclusive, an FPS the marketing referred to as a Halo killer. Did I mention that the big plot twist the game was trying to build up? Where the big corp you start out working for is actually evil, and those rebels you were previously fighting turn out to be the good guys, was immediately spoiled in every single ad for the game? Because someone at Ubisoft certainly thought it was a good idea. The game ultimately failed to live up to the massive amounts of hype it received, garnering Metacore reviews, a blow which quickly dried up the well of future projects. Star Wars Battlefront 3, with the fourth game happening if it sold well, Timesplitters 4, they even got approached by Activision to work on a brand new video game adaptation of the Goldeneye film, bringing things full circle. Pretty much all of those projects were either cancelled outright, failed to get any publishers to fund it, or ended up being developed by someone else. So with nothing left, Free Radical Design went bankrupt on December 18th, 2008. Luckily, someone was able to step in to help. Crytek, who was known at the time for developing the original Far Cry and Crysis, promptly scooped up the whole company in February, renaming the team to Crytek UK. The first title they worked on was co-developing Crysis 2 alongside the main Crytek team, a rather small start. But it didn't take long before they got the chance to create their own big project. Less than a week before Crysis 2 hit store shelves, THQ dropped a little game titled Homefront, a rather poor Call of Duty clone that predictably received the moderate scores you'd expect, and also a firestorm of controversy that would take an entire separate video to cover it all. Despite those rather major roadblocks, THQ still believed that making a sequel would be a worthwhile cause, but there was just one problem. On June 13th, 2011, barely 3 months after Homefront hit store shelves, THQ shut down the development team, KO Studios, as part of what THQ referred to as a strategic realignment within their internal studio structure. Initially, THQ stated that the Montreal studio would handle the franchise from then on, but they quickly decided to have a third party make it, and that third party was none other than Crytek UK. Then THQ went bankrupt about a year later. So Crytek, not wanting all their work on the project to immediately go down the drain after 1 year of progress, quickly acquired the rights for about $544,218. This is the part where it starts shaping up into its final form. The final name, Homefront the Revolution, would be revealed at E3 2014, alongside confirmation that Deep Silver will be handling publishing for it. The game was finally shown in a playable form there, with the developers noting that the removal of THQ from the equation was what led to them splitting off from the linear gameplay of the original. Though curiously, a leaked build of the game, dated to about a week before Crytek acquired the franchise, shows that the open world design was already being implemented before THQ was fully dissolved. Unfortunately, things weren't looking too hot behind the scenes, with numerous reports of financial problems over at Crytek, leading to countless layoffs and developers failing to get paid. All of this would culminate with the announcement that Crytek was selling the Homefront IP over to Koch Media, the company that just so happened to already own the previously planned publisher, Deep Silver. As part of the acquisition, Crytek UK came along for the ride. Now reformed once more under the name Dambuster Studios, the team then finally managed to release the game in 2016, complete with a lengthy message from the studio head explaining the situation. So now that we know the story behind how Free Radical Design slowly turned into Dambuster Studios, we can get into this mysterious Timesplitters 2 demo. The first curious thing about it doesn't require any further research to discover. In the Siberian Dam level, there's a game cartridge lying around in a fairly easy to find spot. In the original game, this unlocked one minigame accessible by pressing the reload button while holding the temporal uplink, or other simple snake clone called Anaconda. Yet in the Homefront demo, you get all 3 of the hidden minigames. Retro Racer, which is normally found in the Neo Tokyo level, and Astrolander, which is normally found in the Robot Factory level. When you start looking into the actual game data, things get far more interesting. For one, all of the assets from Timesplitters 2 are conveniently stored there, not just the content from the 2 demo levels. It's especially noticeable as while the original game stored most of its data in a set of pack files, the Timesplitters 2 demo has almost all of said content extracted in their original formats, though the original pack files are still there too, for some bizarre reason. Then if you open Homefront the Revolution's exe file in a hex editor, you can see that all the text for Timesplitters 2 is in it, including leftover lines mentioning things such as Xbox and PlayStation 2 memory cards. But the biggest piece of evidence pointing toward this not being just a mere demo are what appear to be leftover compiler strings, one of which lists this incredibly interesting file directory. Yes, TS2 Redux, or Timesplitters 2 Redux. Since the directory doesn't mention Homefront at all, it's pretty obvious this was meant to be a standalone game at some point. Now, one particularly important thing to note is that this isn't even the first attempt at bringing back Timesplitters 2 on modern platforms. In an interview with former gaming website Not Enough Shaders in 2012, Martin Hollis brought up that Free Radical Design was actually developing what was a HD downloadable version of Timesplitters 2 back in 2008, though he notes he's not sure what happened to it after he left the company. There's also Timesplitters Rewind, which is a fan project that's more of a proper remake of the whole trilogy. While they did manage to get Crytek's approval, complete with them allegedly being able to release it on consoles such as the PlayStation 4, back when the project started in 2012, and the project hasn't been cancelled yet, it's been a very long time in development. The last dev update was actually back at the end of 2017, which is admittedly not too long ago, but I seriously doubt it's coming out within the next few years. For the sake of completion, I actually attempted to contact the devs behind this Timesplitters 2 Redux project. They are listed every time you launch the demo, after all, and I actually managed to get a proper response. Matt Phillips, who's currently working on a brand new Sega Genesis / Mega Drive game called Tanglewood, was the only person on the team I was able to get a hold of. He explained that he's still under an NDA for his work at Dambuster Studios, and as such, he can only explain things he referred to as light technical inquiries. He noted that any files unrelated to the demo were most likely left in due to time constraints, that they grabbed the most recent codebase for Timesplitters 2 they could find, which was actually called Redux, explaining where the name came from, and that the extra mini-games were a spur-of-the-moment idea that was included because they thought it would be cool. With this extra info, I believe that the Timesplitters 2 HD project Martin Hollis mentioned actually formed the basis of the demo included in Homefront the Revolution. Aside from the note about the code used for said demo being referred to as Redux, implied to be before they even ported it over to CryEngine, there's actually quite a bit of leftover data from later Free Radical Design games in the Timesplitters 2 files. There are several frames taken from an E3 trailer for Timesplitters Future Perfect, logos for Second Sight, and even a leftover development RTF file from the latter game, explaining to the dev team how to properly set up the in-game camera for it. It would be odd for the Homefront team to randomly add this stuff into the files for no reason, so it's highly likely the Redux codebase had those files lying around, left over from when Free Radical was developing those games. While there definitely isn't 100% confirmation that the CryEngine ported Timesplitters 2 Redux build was ever planned to be released as a full game, especially since the rights to the franchise are still owned by Crytek to this day, I wouldn't be surprised if the team attempted to pitch a full release of this somewhat new version of the game at some point. And of course, there's still a chance that someday, Crytek can work out plans for a proper re-release of the series, most likely using the work that was briefly continued by Matt Phillips and his team. So there you have it, a tale of an HD remaster that took over 8 years to get any sort of release. If you want to hear more stories about obscure pieces of gaming history, be sure to like and subscribe.
Thanks for watching.